morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're watching us from. And welcome to this exciting discussion as per the introduction, which will focus on responsible digital leadership and governance. And I'm joined by a very exciting and experienced panel of speakers. And I'll just mention briefly about them, and they will also introduce themselves a bit more when they get into the various discussions. So the first one is Jack, in no particular order, is Jack Ngare, who is the Managing Director of Microsoft Africa Development Center. And second is Yuko, Kawai, joining us all the way from Japan, Tokyo, Japan. And she's a senior researcher with Japan Digital Design Inc. And last but not least is Kennedy Mubita, who's the Africa Region Head for SC Ventures. And they'll give us an idea of what they do for about half a minute when they begin to speak. But I think maybe just to set the context, and thank you very much for that introduction. So my name is Robert Nyamu. I head the technology consulting business for EY across East Africa. And my passion, which I've been doing for the last close to 2 decades, is advising businesses on how they can really embark on a transformation journey. Leveraging technology as a key enabler amongst various other things. So I'm very excited to be moderating this session today, and with the experienced panel that we have with us of speakers, I think it will make for a very exciting conversation. So I think each of the speakers will share some views, and thereafter we'll also take some questions. We'll also take some questions from the audience. I guess one of the facilitators will let us know how that will be done. So maybe just to kick off and to set the context, and I think this is a really good time to be having this discussion, because with COVID having befallen us, I think this whole discussion around digital transformation, which to some people had almost become cliche, or some people were looking at it as a futuristic concept to be discussed later, has been thrust really strongly in our midst. And now it's not a question of whether you want to take the journey. You really have to take the journey, or get disrupted. So there are 2 things here. So what's going to happen is going to happen. So the organizations really need to decide where they're going to be placed within that paradigm. Are they going to be market leaders and show the way, take on a bit of experimentation, fail safe and fail trying, or are they going to take a back seat and wait for other organizations to begin the process and try a few things here and there? So I think when COVID, especially in this part of the world, in East Africa, starting I think around mid-March is when we reported our first cases. This whole idea around digital transformation was accelerated many-fold. Things that we expected to take 2-3 years, and we're discussing 2025 and 2027 and 2030, have happened in those 9 months. And it's both an exciting as well as a scary shift. And I think for those who are thought leaders and daring to experiment, they're finding these exciting times a little bit scary, because if you don't have butterflies in your tummy around what's happening around us, then I think you probably maybe you're not observing enough. So I think it's a really good time to have this discussion with all the digitalization happening around us. There are lots of issues emerging. We're seeing industries converging, value chains getting disrupted, new market players emerging, both here and globally as well, globally and regionally as well. And the question is, which way forward? And there are a couple of questions which our panel of eminent speakers here will touch on in their own perspectives. They will have rich experience and they'll share their views. But I think some of the key points that I'd like to highlight, just that as I set the context on this discussion, is around what's the role of humans. So we talk about digitalization at an exponential rate. What does that mean? Does that mean digitalization to the exclusion of humans? Does that mean digitalization co-opting humans? What's the role of humans in all of this? Is it digital first and humans, or human first and digital, or humans and digital coexisting? And where's the role of ethics in all this? So we're talking more and more about AI doing quite a number of things that humans were previously doing. And as we know, and for those who understand technology well, AI is is a double-edged sword depending on how you're looking to deploy it. So it can either be extremely beneficial, as we've seen, in many fields, from medical to many others. And I know this is a fintech discussion, but I'll touch on a few other sectors as we move, because fintech sits at the center of a very wide ecosystem and supports various other ecosystems beside it. So you might see examples from other sub sectors and sectors. So, and what's the role of regulation? So what's the role of ethics in all of this? What's the role of regulation? And what's the role of humans and talent? What does this really mean? How can you basically be in charge of your digital transformation journey, and how do you balance out these various facets and principles? And I think we'll hear some views from our speakers around that. I have some views around that, and I'll chip in. But I think today we'd like to hear first from the speakers, and they'll share their views from their own perspectives. I'll be happy to take some questions. There's maybe just before I introduce the speakers to give us some of their thoughts. There's a particular framework that I really like, and it's called the Dealing Way, and it touches on 4 key values that are really important for us to bear in mind, especially now. And I'll just touch on the values very quickly, because there's 7 other principles, but the values are around people first and digital always. So having a digital mindset in everything that you do. So if you were traditionally doing things a certain way, how can you now do this in the context of this digital age that we are well into, and we've been thrust even further into, and at an accelerated pace, by COVID-19 across the world. And the second is being tech ahead, thinking about the role of technology and having a technology mindset in everything that you do. And that will drive efficiencies, control, and governance across various things that you do, provided you do it appropriately. And the third key value that I'd like to mention is being data mindful. We say that data is the new oil. It really is. So, but understanding it and being able to calibrate it, analyze it, and use it to drive insightful decision making is when you really experience the power of data as an asset. Otherwise, it's just something within your infrastructure and within your environment, until you really start to transform its value as a real asset. And as we hear people say, it's the new oil. And the last but not least is open by default. So I think those are the 4 key values that I wanted to touch on, and then I'll introduce the speakers. I think I'll just start off with Jack, maybe just to give us his views, for a few minutes around this exciting topic around responsible digital leadership and governance, and then we'll take on the other speakers thereafter. So Jack, over to you. Give us some of your views.
Thank you, Robert, and thanks a lot to the Monetary Authority of Singapore and the Central Bank of Kenya for organizing the Afro-Asia FinTech Summit. It's really a great honor to be part of a panel in such a forum. I'll quickly go into my views. Now, I take almost like an anthropological view of how the world has changed first. I remember back in the days in early man in the Paleolithic era, when fire was discovered in East Africa, by the way. By Stone Age man, there's all of these challenges of how to harness the power of fire to both for the good and for the bad. There's this always dichotomy with every new invention that man goes through, where there's always going to be an aspect of how do we better our society as a whole, using the power that we've discovered, and at the same time, how do we protect ourselves against it in other aspects. And you can go down the list through the invention of electricity and the second industrial revolution, and right down to even when explorers were looking for new places to discover. We approach places like Africa that were not previously discovered with either religion or trade or colonization. And so you have all these different views that afflict every single generation as they discover new things. And so we are living in quite an exciting generation where we discover digital power. And a lot of leaders struggle a lot with how do you harness it for the good, at the same time making sure you protect yourself from the bad. So typically this dichotomy. And what the digital age has taught us, whereas there's always going to be this fine line and a blurred line between good and bad. Take, for example, responsible AI. To what extent can AI replace human? And at the same time, digital currency. What's the role of digital currency in the world? And on data privacy. Is it okay for social media to use our data against us or to target ads to us? So there are all these, sort of issues that have occurred. And to be honest, the lines between, whereas before it was the dichotomy between good and bad, now it's totally blurred. But as a leader, in my view, having run a digital business, what are some of the things you look at, and what are some of the things that you can build internally to advise you and to advise your organization in the best possible way, and also maintain a good level of governance? And some of the things that come to mind is, number one, people first, as already put. You need to get the right kind of team in place. You need to make sure that you're always people-centric. You're always thinking about people first. And one of the main questions I asked when I was running a digital business is, hey, you're moving all the services digital. What happens to the people you're replacing? You're going to just fire all of them, declare them all redundant? And that was always a struggle for some of us. And I'm sure many people have gone through that. And what you try and do is retrain and rejig the human capital to make sure that it's ready for the next evolution. Now, sometimes it's sad. Some people may not be all along the way, but by and large, it's your responsibility as a leader to make sure that you always put people first. And at the same time, your team is always going to be one of the main things that you focus on. At Microsoft, I remember one of the things that made news a couple of weeks ago was that we dropped the requirement for university degrees, for example. And so we need people who are lifelong learners, who have declared interest in a particular subject, and whether or not they have the academic structure in place. And so those are some of the things that the digital age is teaching us. You're looking more for the skill and the attitude more than anything else. The next thing I want to talk about is the team, is the mindset. And being open, having a growth mindset. Carol talked about people who can be able to see beyond what the current circumstances are. Able to join the dots, anecdotally or actually. That, for example, if I invent this new technology, how then does it impact the rest of the society? And so those are the kind of things that, as a leader, you need to be able to focus on. Having a mindset that is able to join these dots in one way or another. The other thing that, you look at is, can a leader or are organizations able to operate in both long-term and short-term? And I kind of call that temporal ambidexterity. We do that in MBA classes. We need people to focus on the short-term as well as the long-term. More and more, you're finding a scenario where leaders to focus on the short-term and long-term, but also at high level and at low level. Because your technology is impacting individuals, households at real time, getting feedback immediately. If they don't like your service, they're going to say you don't like it and post it on social media. So you need to be able to juggle not only short-term and long-term goals, but high-level and low-level type views of your products and services. And at the same time, be able to articulate them in terms of a governance perspective. What does it mean overall to regulators, to your stakeholders, etc. Those are the kind of things that a mindset shift needs to happen to leaders. The other thing is also behaviors and values. And this is pretty much the core of everything. The fact that there are certain eroding behaviors that are happening right now in digital space. And when I say eroding, I could give a good example. Society is built with top-down approaches. Now, in the digital age, you're finding everyone has an opinion on what they're doing. And so it's actually a bottom-up approach coming through. And so from a leadership perspective, you are able to synthesize this information coming not only from the bottom, the top, and be able to give. I'll touch on just one important behavior as well, which means exploring behavior. I remember a scenario where we deployed an app to a certain African country, and it was a financial services app. And what happened was that we visited the country and we discovered that a lot of the people speak French. We didn't, unbeknownst to us, we assumed that the app should also be in French and English. At the same time, we discovered that, hey, look, people don't like the language French in official documents. And so you're able to synthesize this information for the user and quickly turn around and be able to deploy an app that actually makes sense to your audience. In closing, the last thing is regulatory framework. Now, you must be able to also take the information that you get, as well as create a story around what the innovation is in the digital space, because regulation will come. In places such as Kenya, we have a very liberal and quite supportive regulatory framework. It's changing over time, but you have to be able to craft your story of what the innovation is doing to the society, and that's very critical. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack. That's a really good discussion. And in maybe just 20 seconds, what are the key takeaways that you'd like the audience to take away from your discussion around the key tenets of digital leadership? Just very quickly, what's the key takeaway?
So I would narrow it down to people first. So making sure, and people first means not only customer first, but also team first, your individual team. Those people come first. The second thing is having the right set of values. Everything you do must be guided by the right set of values. Whether it's responsible AI, whether it's digital currency, all of them must be guided by the right set.
Thank you very much, Jack. I think very, very, very good words. I think we'll also, I'm sure there'll be some questions for you and for the rest of the speakers from the audience. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Jack. And we'll come back to you on some of the additional points. So I'd like now to shift to Yuko, all the way in Japan, Tokyo. Welcome. Welcome to the discussion. So I'd like to invite you for a few minutes to share your thoughts around this exciting topic. Over to you, Yuko.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you so much for Central Bank of Kenya and the other organizers to invite me over to this very exciting panel. Although I really wanted to visit Nairobi in person, and I first visited Nairobi last year, and that was such a fascinating experience. So I hope that in the near future I can just make a visit over there once again. My name is Yuko Kawai, and I'm joining from Tokyo. And I'm currently working for the company called Japan Digital Design Inc., which is a part of a large the banking group in Japan. Previously, I was working for the Central Bank of Japan up until very recently, and for 18 years. So I would like to make comments from the private sector and private sector viewpoints. So first, let me pick up the one principle, which is the audience focus. And several times already that it was mentioned that people first. And this is what I want to put in the perspective of audience first, audience focus. To me, this is the most, I would say, neglected principle in discussing the digital innovation. And many projects fail due to the lack of scalable demands from the audience. For example, currently there are active discussions going on around CBDC, the central bank digital currency. There are numerous issues like the architecture of digital currency issuance, where it should be direct, indirect, and should DOT blockchain be used, and so forth. But the one very important question central bankers are asking themselves, and we need to ask ourselves, is do individual consumers really need the digital sovereign currencies? Will they be used in corporate transaction or financial contract settlement? If so, what would be the benefit, advantage over the existing digital format of sovereign currencies, which is the reserve deposit with the central bank? So CBDC simply is an example to show the architecture. It's just an example to show that the digital services, including CBDC and others, should depend upon the audience they face. And the degree of the demand for CBDC must be different country by country, and it is not something you can just make it happen only because some other countries are doing it. So this is my example of like the putting the audience first in designing any of the digital services or digitalization, and even in the profit the seeking private sector, I occasionally hear the innovation products, the innovation projects which lack the viewpoints of audience. When I hear the question like, what can we do with AI? What can we do with blockchain and DLT so forth? I get really alert and always try to identify the pain points, i.e. the problems to be solved by applying technologies. So the technology-focused digitalization or any type of, well, non-digital, digital, doesn't matter, products lacking the solid demand from the audience will never thrive, is my opinion. The second is the what Robert has mentioned, it's a data. It's about the data, and data is powerful yet very sensitive project. As a different person feels very differently about the data usage, and different countries have the different the common sense or the history of the data usage. I personally believe China is using data to the very good extent, and to promote the welfare of the society. But I don't think the larger economies, including Japan, will come to the level of China in terms of the level of the usage of the data, because the historical background, the society, the social reasons, and from other reasons. So the way to handle data depends on the culture and circumstances. It's again the people. So I really would like to suggest that one naive common rule to use the data. When you want to use the data, you really need to think about the welfare of the data owner, like individual, the corporations. Say, for example, if I want to provide the data to my trusted service provider because I want to have my life easier, and that's fine. But on the other hand, I really would be very intimidated if somebody pick my everyday life, even if nothing harmful is intended. So it's again like you really need to think about the people behind the data or behind the digital technology you want to utilize. Finally, I really would like to suggest the digital first strategy, which was also mentioned by Robert, I think. There is like the one I entered this when first touched upon this fintech world just a couple of years ago. It was the very thematic the approach was O2O, which is offline to online, and trying to digitize as many things as possible in the real world to shift over to the digitalized world. But now I think the trend is more on the OMO, which is online merges with offline, which means that it really doesn't matter whether it's a digitalization or not. I mean, the best the methodology to be applied for the people's demand, as I said, audience demand matters most. So in order to achieve such, maybe online is better, or maybe offline is better, or maybe the combination online and offline is better. So it's again like the same thing, like putting the people's perspective first, ahead of the digital technology utilization. One last point I would like to make from the governance perspective is the existing rules and regulatory frameworks are normally aligned with the offline traditional real-world activities. They may look obsolete in the digital world, and sometimes it is very true that they need to be changed. However, the core purpose of the regulations, such as may need to be preserved in the digital world as well, such as the customer protection or the prevention of the abusive monopoly and so forth. It is very difficult to properly balance between the innovation and protection, but I personally believe that winning strategy in this changing world is to keep the active dialogue between the regulators and practitioners in order to be very flexible and not forgetting the core principle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuko. And I think maybe in 10 seconds, I heard quite a bit of people first in your discussion. In 10 seconds, what would your key takeaway be for the audience? What do you want the audience to take away from your discussion? You discussed some very good points there. What's your key takeaway in 10 seconds?
Okay. Sometimes it's so fascinating to talk about technology and newly invented things. But please don't start from the technology. Please start from the people. Please start from the designer Please start from the pain points you want to solve, and think about the technology to be applied to best resolve those issues.
Thank you very much, Yuko. I couldn't agree more. I think we talk about digital, and more digital, but I think let's not forget the role of people in all of this, and it's always going to be a people-first world. So thank you very much for sharing your views, Yuko. We'll come back to you with some of the questions later on. So now I'd like to move on to Kennedy Mubita, and he'll introduce himself a little bit more and tell us what he does and share his views around this exciting topic. Over to you, Kennedy.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Central Bank for inviting me to participate in this forum, in this panel. This is a subject that's quite dear to my heart, and sometimes I'm actually finding it's an opportunity for us again to share ideas in terms of how we can look at digital in a different way. I work for SC Ventures, which is a business unit of Standard Chartered Bank. We are created to promote innovation, invest in disruptive technologies, and explore alternative ways of doing business. And I guess the last sentence there, exploring alternative ways of doing business, has been necessitated by developments in ICT globally. And I'll obviously add to what my colleagues have mentioned, because the themes are basically the same, but we'll probably put it with a bit of from our perspective. I have 7 key points that I'd like to make. They're not the only one, but the first one is that I think the pace of technology has been so fast that technology itself has become a subject. And so it's always important to remember that digital technology is a tool. It is not an objective. And just like cars are tools for transportation. So the issue of cars and airplanes is transportation. And digital is also a tool to achieve societal goals. And we should be careful not to make it an objective in its own right, but use it as a tool. The second point that I wanted to make is that, digital and governance, as the point that my colleagues have already mentioned, should focus on societal objectives. And in our lab here in Kenya, Nairobi, we're actually looking at digital from a perspective of value chains. And so we look at how do you apply digital to improve, say, crops in the agricultural industry? How do we apply digital in the medicine space, in the transportation space, in the commerce space? So the subject matter is always the activity that's in society, which has always been the same. And so as leaders in the digital space, we should be looking at how do we leverage these new tools to facilitate or to make these other industries more efficient. And as we digitalize and as we digitize various industries, they make them more susceptible now to applying the digital tools that we have to improve and solve those issues. One statistic that was quoted, that I can quote from PwC, was that 70% of managers are concerned about digital. And that was presented as though it's a positive view. I actually viewed it as a negative view, because it means if 70% of CEOs are worried, it means that they're not comfortable with the changes that will happen to their industries, and they are actually looking for how they survive, will they be able to exist. And so the fact that they don't know how to apply the tools means that there's a lot of space, and us who are in the digital space should lead and help them basically apply their digital technology tools to their current services, to the current services that they provide to society, because the services that people need in society will remain the same. People need transportation, they need food, they need shelter, they need clothing. And digital is a tool that we should focus on to therefore resolve these issues. We should not build, the third point is we should not build technology solutions for their own sake. We should have a problem-focused technology management style. At SC Ventures, we actually have what we call a fintech bridge. And if you go there, you will find challenges. We do not ask questions like, what's your blockchain strategy, or what's your API strategy, and how do you use cryptography? We don't have those kind of challenges. We have common problems that people experience, and we are inviting financial technology companies and people who have understanding to provide solutions with a technology, digital mindset. I believe you said that earlier. Looking at what we do and how we live with a digital mindset, and then proposing these to the industry, and actually leading in terms of applying these solutions and solving those basic societal problems. The other issue, which is my fifth point, is the focus on fair outcomes. In Kenya, we've had a lot of discussion on the lending companies. Just because we now have user interfaces that can allow people to access loans very quickly, and we can validate who they are digitally. People have taken advantage of this. Not everybody, but some people have taken advantage of this, and they have not used digital tools to estimate or understand what the needs of the people who are borrowing are. And a lot of people have been borrowing and spending money on gambling, or borrowing beyond their means, or not being able to align their use of technologies to what they actually need. And therefore, a lot of people have been driven have basically had bad debts, and so we should look for fair outcomes. And so probably like in that area of lending, which the central bank governor has been speaking about quite a bit of time, there are digital tools to enable us assess whether the person borrowing needs that money and whether they've used the money for what they intended it to achieve. But a lot of people who take a very basic view on digital applications just say, just because I can give a UI that can access, people can access funding, I'm going to give them funding and then lend them at 90% because my loss rate is not going to be that high. And so we should look for fair outcomes when we're applying digital tools in our businesses. The other one is digital leaders should own the risk mitigation agenda. They should not look at risk mitigation as an impediment or as if it's been imposed on them. And therefore, the governance framework of an entity or a fintech or a company that's applying digital tools should ensure that it manages the risk, and that is part and parcel of innovation. So risk mitigation is part of innovation. In fact, a lot of the useful innovation in society is actually to mitigate the risk and ensure that the risks of applying that technology are mitigated, and that because this is a new area that's evolving very, very quickly, a lot of people using these digital tools don't understand the risks that they are carrying. And as leaders, we need to be able to think possibly on their behalf, because it will not be possible to train everybody to understand the cybersecurity risk of accessing a website, etc. So you need to actually front load the products with risk mitigation tools before you deploy them in the marketplace. The last point that I would make is that we should view the regulators as allies, not enemies. And now this, I always say this and people find it controversial, but when you are dealing with the regulator, you should look at what is the mission for which a regulator has been set up, whether it's the communications authorities or the central banks. What have they been set up for, and what are they trying to solve? And instead of saying, I cannot do something because a regulator is stopping me from doing something, we should actually approach the regulator, and this is something we do quite frequently from our lab, is that we approach the regulator and help them fulfill their mission by deploying technology. For instance, facial recognition. Possibly when you do a digital facial recognition, you might actually be better than a teller who's just looking at a receipt. I do have some relatives who are quite close who look very, very similar. Sometimes one carries the other's ID and they use it. Now when you're using digital tools, you might actually have a better accuracy and be able to tell between twins, depending on how your platform is. And so leaders should look at regulators, find out what their mission is, and fulfill that mission better, and then go and demonstrate to the regulators that, you're concerned about this risk, you're concerned about AML risk, you're concerned about lending risk. I have digital tools that you can deploy to achieve your mission, and so that the regulator starts seeing you as a partner who is helping meet that societal goal and helping meet the regulation. So those for me are the 7 key points that we have. Of course, Jack mentioned the issue of training, so I didn't repeat that because I have it on my schedule as well, the fact that you need to train your staff and develop them. But in terms of the key issues is, don't look at digital as a tool. Own the risk management framework, focus on fair outcomes, and look at the societal impact of your innovation rather than just seeing what you're going to make out of it yourselves.
Thank you very much, Kennedy. Like we promised, I think you've seen the rich array of ideas coming through from the three speakers. So, like I think those are very good points for the audience to ponder over, because I think there's a lot of discussion around digital. I like what you brought out, Kennedy. One additional point: this should not be digital for digital's sake, but digital is a means to an end, not an end in itself. So I think some really good discussion points coming through from Jack, from Yuko, and from Kennedy. And I think that should give our audience. I think this is a topic. If we're allowed, we'll probably speak. All day. Every day, at least for me, I'm very passionate about this area. But I think in the time that we have, I think you have shared some very good points with the audience. So I think I see a question that has come through from the audience. It's a fairly wide angle kind of question. So I'll put it to you speakers, and you can give your perspectives as we wait for other questions to come through. We'll see whether there are other questions around, and the questions from Kelvin around what is the best model for managing enterprise-wide technology-enabled transformation. So you can each give your views as we see, maybe just a minute each, what your perspective is around this. Just your quick high-level views. I know this is a wide topic. I could speak about this for 2 hours because I'm involved in advising businesses. But maybe starting with you, Jack, what's your quick takeaway around this question? I know it's you can take it from any perspective you like. Jack?
Yeah. I'll try and take the unconventional approach as usual. Carl Rees of who heads up the MIT lab, said that business transformation, digital transformation, when done right, is like a business turning from a caterpillar to a butterfly. When done wrong, it's like getting a faster caterpillar. So you have all this array of things that you need to address in your business. I don't want to sound, like a broken record, but the first thing you have to do is address what the customer pain point is trying to achieve from an organizational perspective. Is it revenue growth? Is it efficiency? Is it cost reduction? Is it customer delight? There's some of these things. It could be a mix of all of them or some of them. But the overarching point is, what do you want to achieve? And out of a whole list of what you want to achieve is prioritization. Many organizations have got tons of projects, whether it's digitizing, the front end, back end, the front office, the back office, the middle office, digitizing loans, digitizing, savings. There are tons of things you can do. But the idea is, which one gives you the biggest bang for your buck, or creates the transformation that you want to do, and prioritize just those one or two things that you want to achieve, and then approach it in an agile mindset. You do not know what the outcome is, and I'll tell you what, even if you approach the biggest of the brands, in the digital space, they will also be learning with you, because every organization is unique, and whether we like to do it or not, we have nuances that inform the technology and how it's executed. So one technology that works, let's say, the biggest bank in the US, may not necessarily work for the biggest bank in Kenya or Uganda or Tanzania. There's something nuances about those things that we need to understand. And infuse that into what and then go forward and make sure that it's a learning experience. One of the things I always say is always be on better. Never say we're in production. We always say we're in beta testing. We have deployed it, but we're still in beta because we're learning and we're tweaking.
All right, thank you very much, Jack. I know we've run out of time, but I wanted to give an opportunity to Kennedy and Yuko, maybe just to add some very quick thoughts around that question, if you may. If there's anything that you want to add to what Jack mentioned, are you comfortable? Yeah, Kennedy?
In addition to what Jack mentioned, basically, if we look at our models, first of all, it depends on how much risk appetite do you have, and how much capital do you have to support that risk. You might have very you must have a very high risk appetite, but if you don't have the capital to support potential losses, then probably you shouldn't do that. And then secondly, it depends on what industry you are. SC Ventures is a part of Standard Chartered Bank, which is set up for innovation, but in a sense we are separated from the bank because the bank is a regulated institution, and therefore we are handling people's money. So it depends on, sorry, my lights thing. I need to move around a little bit. Yeah, so it depends on, how much or what risk are you allowed to do? Because if you are handling other people's money, you cannot extensively, regardless of your high risk appetite, you cannot just go out and just expose your customers to various structures. And then also depends on people impacted. If it's life threatening, then obviously you're going to try it in a very serene environment where you've actually immunized it from various risks, and you try little by little. But if it's not people centric or doesn't impact human beings, you can actually probably try and have a much wider. But in the short answer to that, if you look at it from the Standard SC Ventures perspective, is that we have separated out the risk-taking or the technology risk-taking business, which is what I run here, and the client funding part of the bank. And then we then adopt new challenges and try them, make them go through a proof of concept or proof of value or minimum viable product framework outside the bank before we can then start ingesting it into the bank so that it can be applied in a secure manner where we have actually tested. It's almost like doing a vaccine. You test it out, and then since everyone's talking about COVID vaccines, you test out the vaccine on a small population, see how it works. Once you've found that it's effective, then you introduce it into the community. I would not advise somebody to try a very high risk product on his main enterprise framework, because then there is a risk that it might not work, and then that will collapse the entire business. So test, but immunize your core business. That's what I would say.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. I know we've run out of time. I wanted to hear some views from Yuko. We're right at the top of the hour. Maybe in 15 seconds, Yuko, anything you'd like to add?
Okay.
Close.
In enterprise-wide digitalization, please don't look at the procedure. Please don't start from the procedure. If you start from the procedure and digitize those parts, it's just a mechanical the effects you're gonna get. Go back to your company mission, and if you think that the best way to achieve those company mission is to digitize, just go digitization.
All right, thank you very much. And now, so I think we're over time, so I'd like to hand it over to the organizers, and thank you so much I'd like to thank our speakers so much for sharing some very good insights. Jack, Yuko, and Kennedy. I think audience, you'll agree that they've shared some really good, insightful ideas around this exciting topic. I think this is an area we could continue talking for hours, but for today, I think that's where we close this conversation, to be reconvened at another time. So thank you so much, speakers, and thank you to the organizers. Thank you to the Central Bank. And now I'd like to hand it over to the organizers. Over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.